excited at how exciting this is.
Hi, everybody. My name is Linnea Seidling. I am the assistant curator here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And tonight I'm in the Hot Shop Amphitheater to introduce a demonstration that is a collaboration between our amazing hot glass team here at the museum and the curatorial department. The hot glass team had the great idea of featuring the museum's new exhibition, Past, Present, Expanding the Stories of Glass, in a series of demonstrations inspired by works in the exhibition. So tonight we are here with Jeff Mack, manager of hot glass programs and projects, and assisted by Helen Tiegler, and also narrating tonight. And also we have Catherine Ayers over there, and then we have Katie Hubbs as well, and then I think Anna Johnson will be joining us later. So a little bit about the exhibition, if I could pull up the first slide, thanks so much. Past, Present, Expanding the Stories of Glass opened in May and will be open here at the museum through January. It features objects pulled from across our vast collection of over 50,000 objects, and it was co-curated, meaning that each of the museum's curators was responsible for a different part of the show. If you could do the second slide. Past Present is an exhibition of objects with rich stories pulled from across the museum's collection. The stories of objects are always evolving, but what remains constant is that they provide connections with the past in ways to consider human experiences then and now. I don't have enough hands to hold my notes, a microphone, and the PowerPoint clicker. So in 11 groups of objects, we feature objects and their stories accompanied by thought questions, digital displays, and activities meant to spark conversation and encourage our visitors to actively participate in the exhibition. So the group of objects that we're going to be looking at tonight explores the theme of resilience.
That's like right here. And then you'll keep it towards that.
There's another photograph of our great exhibition space upstairs in the 35 Centuries Gallery. And then here is the vignette that I will be talking about. So each object in this vignette tells a story of a woman who underwent tragedy, becoming a refugee during World War II and building a new life in the United States. You get a better look at the two objects. So the piece on the left is a work by the artist Shari Deans titled I Spy. She made it sometime in the 1950s. This piece recalls the violent horrors of Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. On November 9th and 10th, 1938, the Nazis destroyed Jewish communities throughout Germany and Austria, beginning the genocidal phase of the Holocaust. Deans did not experience Kristallnacht firsthand, but these shards, packed in a suitcase, suggest the collective fractures that Jewish people have experienced and often carry with them. The shards of their lives and communities, like the shards of glass from that night, were packed up in a suitcase, and those lucky enough to flee brought them to new lands to begin to repair. And yet, the piece is not just about fracture. It's also about resilience, about composing and organizing the shards of a life shattered and seeing new reflections. Again, not enough hands. We go back to the previous slide. Okay, so the piece on the right was donated to the museum in 2017 by a woman named Roberta Elliott. It was made in Bohemia, a region in Germany, sometime in the 1910s. In 1938, Roberta's family was tipped off that their names were on a Nazi deportation list. They fled Vienna, Austria, to the United States. But before leaving, they were able to place all of their possessions in the care of a non-Jewish colleague of Roberta's father. Most Jewish families who fled during the war lost everything. But remarkably, the Elliots managed to reclaim all of their belongings after the war. Throughout her life, Roberta has endeavored to pay her family's experience forward, even working for the refugee agency that helped resettle her family in the United States. Similarly, when she inherited these objects, including the vase on display, she knew that she could not hold on to them herself. She decided to donate the vase to the museum so that her family's story of fracture, repair, and resilience could always be told. With this grouping, we invite our visitors to think about the concept of resilience and the unfortunately universal experience across time and place of human suffering and difficulty. I'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Jeff. So behind the case where we have the two objects displayed, we have an activity where we invite visitors to write on orange pieces of paper about something difficult that they've already overcome or something that they're hoping to overcome in the future. And they fold up the piece of paper and add it to the cracks of the wall. We hope that this will be a cathartic experience for visitors, and seeing all of the pieces of orange paper will show people that they are not alone in their challenges, that everyone knows what it's like to experience loss or to struggle and to persist in the face of it. So, Jeff, can you tell us about what you're making tonight and how it connects with the theme of resilience that we have highlighted in past present?
Thanks, Linnea. Thanks for being here. And if you haven't seen the show Past Present, make sure to come down to the museum and check it out. There's a lot of inspiring themes and just a new way to look at glass objects here at the museum and thinking about the stories that are behind them, even the stories that they've been through. So the piece I'm making, it emulates another piece in our museum that is in a case of modern glass up in the 35 centuries of glass gallery. It's on loan and it's on display here currently. It's called Merletto Irregolare, and it is a piece by Archimedes Seguzzo. So there is the piece. It was made in the 1950s, and I like to relate the vessel to the human condition, to the body. It's a great analogy to use for it. And this particular piece goes through a lot in the process of making it. So the process for making it involves a certain resilience to the glass. It has a very strong base color with the canes that can be twisted and manipulated, and that's what we just did. So the first part of the process is I'm rolling up traditional Zinfirico cane, which is patterned canes, and then jamming it into a mold, distorting it, really crumbling up the bubble basically to get what looks like kind of a lace, an irregular lace pattern. And then I take the cup, which Catherine has on the end of the punny right now. So that's made already, just because we have limited time. The crew here has recorded the first part of the demo. So when this is posted on YouTube, the whole process will be shown. But we've made a vessel already. We're going to cut it apart, and then we're going to put it back together to be something completely different. Right now it's sort of a vase, a small vase. It's going to end up being a small vase that's patchwork together. And you see the one in the image here is patched with a pink glass. The one I'm going to make today is going to be patched with blue glass. So what I'm trying to get across here is that I'm putting this piece, it starts off as one thing and then it's systematically cut to pieces and taken apart, and then it's re-put back together, becomes something totally different. So that's kind of the idea and the concept behind using this piece as an example and being inspired by resilience in the Past Present exhibition, which is a great little prompt for this. So so I'm going to get going and hand it back to Linnea, and then Helen Tegler will be taking over the narration while we're making the piece.
All righty. Well, thank you, Jeff and Linnea. Let's give them a big round of applause. Great introduction to what we're doing and why we're here today. So those of you who might have come in just a few minutes after we got started, we are doing a live stream right now. So we are on the internet, and we welcome everyone from far and wide that have joined us here. We are really honored to be able to present these kinds of programs and special events, and sometimes they go on the internet. So keep an eye on our website. We've got lots of live streams coming up throughout the rest of the summer. A couple more relating to this particular show, Past and Present, and each artist who has been chosen to demonstrate an object is taking those themes from the show and creating their own works of art related to some of those themes. So it's a great show. I had a chance to pop in there yesterday and read all the signage and look at all the pieces and everything. It's a really interesting show that I think brings to life the stories. That's really a lovely part of that particular show, Because we so often come to museums, we look at all the beautiful objects, and we may not really think about the story behind them or really understand the history that was involved in bringing those pieces to life. So hopefully, once you've seen a demo like this, once you've gone through the show, it'll give you a new appreciation for all of the things in our collection and all those possibilities and the stories behind them. So just to catch everybody up of what we started with, I know we talked a little bit on the live stream earlier. Again, it's a little strange that we got started a little early, so I narrated a little earlier on some of it. But just to catch everybody up on some of the processes. We've made this cup from cane, as Jeff has described. And the process is going to be cutting this cup into all these parts, and we need to keep all the parts warm. Glass expands and contracts as it heats and it cools. So if those little parts get too cold, they'll start to crack and pop. And so we're essentially creating puzzle pieces out of that cup. So we've got Anna here. She is warming up a pastorelli plate. This is a ceramic plate that's been coated with a ceramic release, and that will make it easier for the glass. If it does get too hot, hopefully it won't stick. Glass has a tendency to be really sticky when it's hot. So when it warms up and sticks to things like metal, or like our blowpipes, or it'll stick to things like ceramic that these plates are made out of. We also, once we get all of these warmed, then we'll start piecing it back together. So most of what the team's going to be doing is a lot of heat maintenance over the next couple bit of time, just to make sure that all these parts stay in one piece. But if you look really carefully at those patterns that you see, that very complicated, almost looks like a string or cheesecloth that's been wrapped around itself. So to make that, we needed to start out with cane. Is there anyone out there that knows what cane is? A couple of you? All right, well, for those of you who might not know what cane is, this is an example of it. And you can see a lot of examples of cane. It's a very old process, and it can be used in a lot of different ways. We'd be here all day talking about all the possibilities. So I'm really just going to focus on what Jeff has done with cane. But we start out with a rod of glass. Now, the most basic cane would just be clear. You gather some glass, you shape it up, you pull it between two irons, and you get a long string of glass. We'd chop that up, and the section would be called a cane. So we started out with some white cane. Started with a core of white color, gathered clear on top of it, and then pulled that out into a cane. So if you think of it looking like a pencil, the lead would be the white and the wood would be the clear glass. So we're having a core of white, which is a long, thin line in the middle of that clear. Now, in order to make a very complicated Empirico cane, we needed to use cane to make other cane. So we took maybe 5 or 6, you can do up to 10, 12, it really depends on the kind of cane you're making. But he took a few canes, looks like 3 for this particular one, picked them up on the core, gathered clear glass over top of them, and then rolled that package of glass through more cane. So picked up cane on the surface. So now we've got cane running through the core, and we've got cane running on the surface, like a cage on the outside. And this is all solid mass of glass. So when we go to pull them into their cane, if we just pull, those lines would stay straight and stretch into a nice straight pattern. But we wanted to have a twist effect. So the gaffers actually twist the pipes as they go apart from each other, and it creates that helix in the center and the cage effect on the outside. So Jeff had a couple different versions, 3 different versions of these Empirico canes. And we laid them all out on a very similar pastorelli plate to what we're using to keep all the parts warm, and warmed it up in that reheating chamber, just like Anna's doing right now with all those little parts. We got the glass just hot enough so that they started to melt together. Once those little individual canes started to melt together, that essentially created a sheet of glass made out of all these little canes. So once we have the sheet of glass, then we roll it up on the end of the pipe. We make like a donut on the end of the blowpipe, and then that's going to be what we attach all those little canes to and roll them up together, and then squeeze down the end of that tube, and that essentially gives us a bubble. And we can make pretty much anything we wanted out of that texture or that decorated bubble. Well, what Jeff did was to actually take that textured or decorated bubble and stuff it down into a mold a few times. So we've got various molds here in the front of our stage, and each one of them have a slightly different pattern, but most of them have ridges on the inside. So you can imagine if you stuff a bubble that has a lot of design on the surface, well, they're gonna push and pull where those little ridges are. So that's how he did a lot of the mixing of those canes. Putting it into the mold, twisting it, putting it back into the mold, twisting it again, and just kind of pushing and squishing it around until we got that beautiful lace effect out of those canes. So now that we have our cane, is there any questions to start us out here? This is also a good time to remind you that not only I have a microphone, my name's Helen, I'm happy to answer questions in-house, but we also have our online, so you can ask questions online, and Amanda will get those questions to me, and we'll be able to answer them. But do you have a question to start us out? It's a great question. How are we going to put it back together? I know, it's hard to wait for the whole thing to not just see it play out. But to be 100% honest, I don't even know how we're going to put it all together. I've never seen him do this technique before. But the theory is that we're going to take all those little pieces. Now, does anybody out there like to play with puzzles? Yeah, I really like puzzles too. And you know, when you've got all those puzzle pieces, you got to figure out how they kind of match together and lay together so that they create one picture. Well, Jeff is essentially making a lot of puzzle pieces. So the hard part is going to be putting this puzzle back together. And we can't just get the glass to stick. Well, we could get it to just stick together, but we're going to use additional glass like glue to help stick all the parts back together. So here on the Marver, you can see that beautiful lace pattern with the blue in between. This is pretty much what we're making, is a vessel like that. So once we get all these parts and pieces cut from the original bubble, then we'll start to rebuild it, and using blue glass like glue in between to stick all the parts back together. It should be really fun. But great question, thank you for that. Is there any other questions that we have out there? They can be about glass or about our gaffers, about the museum. Yes? Yeah, what's the advantage of cutting them into pieces and putting them back together? Well, one thing is that it's a good challenge. That's always fun. We are also looking, of course, at that idea of resilience. And when you're looking at glass, when you're doing a one-off, there's not as much danger. Meaning if you gather some clear glass, you blow a bubble, you can make a simple form, and you'll probably get a simple form out of it. But if you start to delve into more complicated processes, it ups the ante on the success rate. It can make a greater likelihood of failure or happy accidents, I like to say, because sometimes you discover things when making accidents or making those explorations. So when you're looking at the pattern that we see on the vessel here, you might notice that everything's kind of angled, like the designs are in different directions. So one of the biggest advantages of doing a process like this, and I'm looking at this as sort of like doing Marini, and I'll go into Marini in a second for those of you who don't know what that is, but I kind of look at it as piecing together so that you can be in greater control over that pattern. If it's just one big pattern, we wouldn't be able to fit in all of the little spaces in between. Even if we drew that blue onto the surface, we'd still see the lace pattern underneath it. So it's just another way of creating a more complicated pattern with a little bit more control in some angles, but a little more adventure, let's say, on the other side of it. But yes, I'll be excited. It'll be very exciting to see the resilience of this piece as it comes together. That's one of the reasons why Anna is using that torch, just to making sure nothing gets too cold. And they're laying them out, I believe, in a very specific way on that plate as well, so that they can keep track of those pattern pieces and how they'll go back together. Now, one thing about glass, though, it's pretty malleable, right? It can be soft and squishy. So even if we don't get things to match up perfectly, part of the beauty of this pattern is its happenstance and how things fold on top of each other. And so for as crisp and exacting as a lot of the work that Jeff does and his inspiration from a lot of Italian techniques, this is one of the looser ones that I've seen him do, and it's really, really fun and exciting. Yes, ma'am.
He probably made a whole kind of hard.
So 2 questions. 1, why didn't he just start with sheet glass? And 2, how is he going to use the blue? Or why is he? Yeah. So we are going to use blue to adhere this all together because we currently have a very small tank of colored glass going in our small furnace on the far end of the stage, and it's blue glass. So instead of having to warm up individual chunks of glass or coat them with color and things like that, we are really lucky to have that tank of blue, so that's why we're using blue glass today. But usually we work all clear here at the museum, and we melt only clear rather. And any color that we want to use has to be added separately, and usually as a whole separate process. So when we buy our colored glass, it comes to us in 2 forms. One would be a product called frit, which are just little pieces and particles of glass, and the other is bar. And it's the same exact material, it just comes to us in bigger, larger chunks. Now we use big solid chunks like this to create all the cane and pull that into the strings and mix it around. And if we wanted to add that into this piece, we could maybe start with color on the first end of the pipe, and that would end up being the base color for the object. You can also use, again, the frit. Frit would be little particles, so if you're looking at pieces that have maybe lip wraps on them, you could take a small amount of clear glass, coat it with the little chips, they melt into the surface, and gives you the illusion of a solid color, but it's actually only a surface treatment because we've melted that color to the surface. So all of that glass is made and formulated to be compatible. So meaning that they expand and contract at a similar rate, so that when it expands as it heats and it shrinks as it cools, they don't blow up and fight and explode the piece later on. So you have to have the right kind of glass. So if we were to take a pattern sheet glass and cut that up and make it into a pattern, that's completely valid, but there's not a lot of sheet glasses that are compatible with the glass that we use. So we have to kind of make our own sheet glass, and that's essentially what he's done. Just leaving it in a bubble form rather than blowing it into a cylinder, cutting off the ends, and then opening that up into a flat sheet. If you're curious about how glassmakers make sheet glass, we did a demo a couple years ago. We had a Tiffany exhibit that came through, and we were doing a lot of demonstrations on how to make those sheet glasses, and I know that that is on our YouTube channel. It was a really fun process, but we were creating very highly decorated bubbles, blowing them into cylinders, putting them onto the pastorelli so we could slice it down then and flare it open, just like they did in some of the first sheet glass makers, using giant bubbles to create giant pieces of handmade glass. But even if we had the sheet glass that came to us in a certain way, then that, oh, we're gonna start putting it back together already. Awesome. But yeah, mostly it's a compatibility process. Plus, it's just fun to squish stuff around. So this is starting some of that blue glass. And as he's piecing this back together, I just want to forewarn everybody that it's probably going to look like a bit of a hot mess for a while, right? It's going to be all these parts and pieces and lumpiness and everything else. But don't worry, it's all part of the process. We're gonna piece all this together using all these different blobs of glass, and then he'll get the whole thing hot and get everybody nice and squishy and start to smooth that shape out a little bit so that then we can blow that out into the vessel of his final choosing. Those of you that are here with us today in-house, or those of you who are excited to come and visit in the future, I highly suggest you check out not only, of course, our past present show, but the little area of our 35 centuries that has these beautiful lace-like pieces that Jeff was describing and we showed on the screen earlier. There's a couple of them up there in slightly different variations, and all of them have this really lovely kind of free-form quality to them that really captures the bits and pieces, the movement, and the adventure that happens to pull this piece together in the end. Fantastic. So we are using a torch. Torches are wonderful additions to our process of glass making. They allow us to spot heat things. Now we have a 2,100 degree furnace that we reheat our glass in as we work, but occasionally, especially doing complicated processes like this, it's nice to have a little bit of focused heat. Now the torch that Anna's using right now is just propane, so it's what we call the fluffy. It's keeping things warm, but it's not really going to truly melt things as she's standing there. If we wanted to get a torch that would instantly melt the glass, behind her we'll have a handled torch with a little wood handle in red. That's a combination of both gas and oxygen, most commonly seen in flame working. And anybody get to see our flame working demo today? Hopefully, yeah. We got a really great new booth and setup up there. It's really exciting to see that all come back together here at the museum. But those torches are traditionally for flame working, and they can burn upwards of 5,000 degrees, really hot, intense flames that also have oxygen. So that big, hot, clean flame can be used for very direct heating and very specific. So if we were going to piece this back together without using any of this blue glass, that could be a way of doing it, using the hot torch to spot heat the edges of the two puzzle pieces he wanted to put together, getting them just hot enough to stick together and not collapse. I really love that we're using this blue glass too, because these blues tend to show off the heat really well. And when I say that, showing off the heat, it's just seeing the glow, right? We know that glow and the orange that we see is not the color of glass. We know that it's the heat of the glass, reflecting in that. And so as we add new bits, you can see where the last bit is still holding a little bit of heat, but the first bit is pretty much turned down to its color now. So we had a question online. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. But somebody asked if this is a copper blue glass, and I do believe that it is a copper blue glass. It is one, again, we melted ourselves in a small tank over on the side of our studio. So it's very quick and easy for Katie to be able to gather out what she needs, the amount of glass that she needs, instead of having to use frits and powders and other applications of color to create that color. Now, if we were to use frit and powders and other colors, usually those are processes where you're putting color on the surface of a blob of clear. So when you stretch it and add it to a piece, it might look solid, but it's actually got no color in the core of it. So once we get this pushed and squished around, if it did have color on the surface only, those colors would start to meander over and really concentrate in different ways. So it would give you a whole different look than using solid color from the furnace. Okay. So this is also a very conscious choice on Jeff's part to be able to get just the kind of color pattern that he's looking for. I'm loving this little setup that we've got here today. This is so funny. Sometimes if you don't have the tools, you got to make the tools, right? So we cobbled this together earlier today to make sure that it was nice and steady for Jeff, and also just not nearly as heavy. Those forks themselves, those are metal forks that hold that ceramic plate. You know, by the time you get the glass and the ceramic plate and the forks and everything, that's a lot of weight. Now, something might not feel too heavy when it's close to you, but as soon as you put it telescoping away from you, it's going to feel even heavier. So this is a really great solution to be able to make it a little bit more ergonomic, a little bit safer for the team to be wielding this back and forth and carrying all that weight around. Beautiful. I love these close-ups. It really shows you how Jeff is paying very close attention to all the gaps and the spaces. Did anybody notice when he first started, he kind of touched it and he just like held it there for a second? Kind of let the gravity of the glass kind of seep into that crease just a little bit. And again, Jeff Mack's been blowing glass for almost 30 years. So he's making a lot of these processes, even though they're very unusual, seem pretty effortless. He's got lots of experience, great understanding of the material and the heats necessary, and just the fluidity of it. I have a lot of people that say, well, I can't be a glass blower. I'm not creative enough. I don't believe that. It's not always all about creativity. Sometimes it's just about learning a process. And glass is certainly one of those things that it's a lot of process. It's a big learning curve. And it's going to be some tears. There's going to be, some disappointment, but that's perseverance. You have to learn how to be kind to yourself, be kind to the adventures that you have, and learn from every experience that you have in glass, and try to, create that repertoire of things that you're good at. And a lot of people ask, what's the most difficult thing to make? And our sassy answer is the thing you've never made before. Because you may get really good at making goblets, and then somebody asks you to make a squirrel, and you might struggle a little bit, or vice versa. But that doesn't mean that they're not a good glass blower. You just have concentrated in a particular technique. So we've got a lot of tools that we're using to help push this together. You might notice Jeff has also put a glove on his right hand. Now, in general, glass blowers don't wear gloves on a regular basis. We need the dexterity. We need to be able to turn the pipe, control the tools, and be able to work safely. And gloves are generally only needed if you're going to be grabbing things that are hot or being very close in proximity to things that are hot. And no, the pipe and the regular blowing is not considered holding on to something hot. Those pipes are stainless steel. They dissipate their heat quite nicely. And so where Jeff is holding on is completely comfortable, maybe like a warm cup of coffee or something, but he's not going to end up burning himself. So no need for a glove on that left hand. But this particular process, he's got his fingers right in there, really close. So putting on a glove makes that process more comfortable. But you'll also notice that Catherine is doing all of the pipe handling here. She's the one going back to the reheat, bringing it back to Jeff. So that dexterity issue of turning the pipe with gloves, not as much of a concern. And Katie's getting quite the pinch point here. Just got to be careful to deliver this in a nice position for Jeff, but also, of course, not get herself too close to that pastorelli plate. Nice. That's some lovely patterning. You can really see how all of those canes, it's kind of hard to tell when you're moving around, but every once in a while you might be able to notice a subtle stripe and kind of identify where those original cane were used in that process. Did a lot of mixing and matching. But we will have this piece up here. If anyone wants to come and take a closer look, you're welcome to get a closer look at what that amazing pattern really looks like. So how's everybody doing? Do you have any questions? You guys enjoying your day here at the museum? Yes? No? Quiet bunch? End of the day? Well, I see a hand up there, so let me go answer a question. So what happens if one of the pieces decides to fall off? Well, I would imagine some of the wiggle room we have in this process is that if he didn't get every single piece back together, hopefully he could fill in another piece and squish it together and not really notice too much. But he is trying to rebuild that shape, very similar to what it started with. But he's given himself lots of options. Do you think you'll use all those pieces, Jeff? You're going to use all the pieces? Every single one, yeah. But yeah, it has a little bit of flexibility. But that brings up an interesting point, though, because a lot of times there's not a lot of recovery. So if we get to a critical point in a process and one of those pieces in the puzzle, meaning the bigger picture of the object we're making, ends up breaking, or something gets dropped, or something explodes, well then you can get yourself in a little bit of a pickle. It's kind of hard to keep making the piece if you don't have all the parts. Do we have another question from online? Yeah, so we got a nice question online wondering about how long it took Jeff to make that cane cup that we're taking all the parts from. Well, the short answer is about a half an hour. But that's only to make the cup. We started right around 5 o'clock because, again, we had a limited amount of time for our live stream, but we wanted to have the whole process for the online presence. So this entire process will be available when we have it uploaded to our YouTube channel. But to make that cup, it took him about 30 minutes because we already had the cane made. Making the cane, he could have maybe spent a whole day pulling cane. Because for each one of those Sympherico canes, the cage or the helix in that cane is an individual cane. So we have to make canes to make canes. And they take time to warm the color up and to gather over them, pull them out, let them cool, slice them up, put them back together, roll them up to make another cane. So the cane making process can be pretty lengthy. But once you have all those canes and some parts, we just lay them out onto that pastorelli. It takes maybe 5 minutes to warm them up and to get them warm enough to where they're flexible, and we can roll them up into the tube that then gets squeezed down the end of that tube to create the bubble, and then that bubble turned into that bowl that we cut up. But that's, again, also 30 years of experience that made that happen in such a quick fashion. If you were looking at a beginner class, they might still be working on making those cane. They might not even get to that bubble yet. So it's quick and efficient, and a lot of people are really surprised at how quickly and efficiently we can make demo pieces here at the museum as well. But it just really shows and is a testament to the experience of the gaffers here. And a lot of us that come to the museum, we need to be very diversified. We need to have a little bit of experience in a lot of techniques so that we can be as helpful as possible for the special demos, for the visiting artists, creating our own work, and of course making dynamic demos that really show off not only our love of the material, but hopefully give you a little bit of an appreciation and love for the material and what goes into all of those beautiful objects that you see in our collection. So any other questions? So this is the start of, I think it's the second. We got at least 2 more of these special demonstrations associated with the past and present show. We've got Caitlin and Eric coming up, I believe, next week. Check our website for all the upcoming special events, live streams. But we got at least 2 more, and I know Chris Rochelle will be also doing one later on this summer. and they're both taking inspiration from our past and present show, one of those themes, and putting that together for the demo. This gives our team an opportunity to really stretch our creative muscles a little bit, and last year was the first year that we had done a collaboration with our curatorial team doing demonstrations and getting their input, and it was so successful we wanted to bring that program back this summer as well. So thank you, Linnea, for joining us and giving us a little bit more inside perspective on these amazing pieces. No worries, we just pick that right up. No worries, we just pick that right up. Actually, we're gonna need to warm that back up just a little bit. So you can see when he went to stick it, it just wasn't sticking. That just means that the temperature was just a little off. So if the blue bit gets too cold, nothing will stick to it. And if that original piece, we're not getting those molten, so we're really needing them to have just the right temperature. And even a second's delay, and it's not necessarily an error, it's just sometimes the timing gets a little off and it just doesn't want to stick. But there he goes, good recovery. Let's give him a big round of applause, actually. It's been a while. Get some energy in the crowd. Awesome. Good recovery, Jeff.
Stick to itness.
All right, so one more puzzle piece I see there, but again, remember what I said earlier, this is gonna be looking a little bit hot mess for a while, right? So we've got all the rough piece together, and then once we get all those pieces together, then we're gonna start squishing that blob back into a bubble. Right now, it's an open bowl. I just had to check with Jeff on some of the process, because again, I have not seen him do this either, so making sure I'm on track as well. But yes, now we've got most of the parts. You can see there's just enough hole there for that last part. Just watch Drippy Glass all day long. So beautiful.
Now,
All right.
3/4, let's do a nice big.
Nice job, team. Nicely done.
Hold up. I'm going to mush it just a little bit.
All right, so I'm gonna do some mushing, some squishing, and then they're gonna seal up the bottom of it, trying to work on getting this reattached to another blowpipe. There's a lot of processes that will trade glass from one iron to the other in various ways to either switch its direction or to clean up a particular area. So what we'll end up doing is squishing this together and cleaning up where we're going to connect it to the pipe. because right now it's obviously way too wide to be able to have a pipe attached to it. And I know there's a pipe attached to the bottom, but we want to put this back onto a blowpipe so that we can add air into that shape to actually get the blown vessel shape that we're looking for.
Let me get a little bit, Katie. A little filler. A little smaller than what you've been bringing.
So I'd mentioned earlier about other processes, and I just remembered I never went back to finishing the thought about marini. So I'm looking at this process as being sort of a version of marini, and the fact that you are taking parts and pieces and then assembling them together to create a pattern. So marini is a very similar process to cane, is if you pull that long string, the same exact long string, and you cut it up and look at its profile, we consider that a marini. So if you wanted to make just a dot marini, well, you just take that same white cane that Jeff made, slice it up, look at its profile, and there we've got a little white dot surrounded by clear glass. So you can make various patterns of those marini. They can be very complicated as well, layering up multiple colors, creating all kinds of patterns. That's another thing that you can come up and take a closer look at if you'd like to. But you can also, just like making these complicated lace patterns, you can use those individual marinis to make more complicated patterns by bundling all of those decorative patterns together, re-pulling them again, and you could do that over and over and over to create infinite designs and possibilities. So taking all those parts and pieces, you would lay them out on a pastorelli, just like we did with these square pieces. Melt them together just enough to get them to start to stick, and then either roll them up on the surface of a bubble or roll them up by themselves and creating a cup, very similar to what Jeff did at the beginning. This is a really beautiful big wrap. This will just add a little extra material and a concise material. So hopefully that will aid in getting that closed down just a little bit, more of an even edge.
Try to make it color.
Now another complication that Jeff has added to himself is the fact that blue glass and white glass are very different in the way that they heat. Can anybody tell me what glass is made out of to start? Yell it out. Silica. Ooh, that's the pro answer right there. So we've got silica sand. And then what we add to that sand will give us different kinds of glasses. Now here at the museum, we're using a soda lime glass. That just means it has the silica sand, it has soda ash, and it has limestone. The soda ash lowers the melting temperature. Makes it a more soft and malleable glass. If you were to take sand by itself, it would take maybe 4,000 or more degrees to get it to melt, and it would be super stiff. You couldn't really form it into much. But by adding that other material, it makes it soft, it makes it malleable, and that allows us to play with it. Now the limestone is also a stabilizer, so it will keep that chemistry from melting in water over time. And you don't think of glass as being permeable to water, but if you don't get the chemistry right, it can. It can melt, it can kind of degrade, and you'll see examples of that in any glass, any museum that has glass, ancient glass, and you look at the surface and it might have little tiny cracks or chisels or maybe kind of an oil slick look to it. That's the chemistry kind of breaking down over time. So if you want to use color, then you have to add things to that mixture to create the color. So for our blue glass, we added some copper and a couple other metallic oxides to create that beautiful color. So once you have those colors, though, they're going to melt slightly differently. And some of it has to do with the chemistry and what you add to it. Different metals, different chemistries will melt at higher or lower temperatures or soften faster. And then we have things like white. White is considered one of our stiffer colors. It takes more energy to get that white to become soft. So some of it has to do with the chemistry, but some of it also just has to do with a light and darkness of that material. If you're going to go to the beach for the day, are you going to dress all in black or are you going to dress all in white? Jeff says black. He likes to sweat. So if you're looking at wearing white, it's going to reflect that heat energy. If you're wearing black, it's going to absorb all that heat energy. So with this particular piece, he's given himself a really soft glass in between, so it'll get squishy a little faster. And then he's got all of the white patterns that want to stay stiffer. So it's kind of fighting each other as you're working. And you can use that to your advantage. You can use it to your disadvantage. You can even see in the practice vessel, you know, how much kind of wider the little stripes kind of stretched further, but this stayed really tight. And I'm getting a little gimpy arm here, but so you can see how that is so much softer. When he went to blow that out, it expanded even further. So once we get this squished together, that's also going to be something he'll have to keep a keen eye on, because he told me before, we're not going to gather over this. And so by gathering over it, that just means we dip clear glass over the whole surface. And if we did that, then it would kind of shellac everything on the outside, make the surface all smooth, and help hold everything together a little bit better. But it would take away some of the tactile qualities that we have with this. Because with that clear, or any white that would be on the surface, any transition from one piece to the next, it's always going to have a little bit of a memory. And as it expands, as it moves, it's going to move slightly differently. So here we've got our secondary pipe. It's a collar, beautiful transfer. That matched right up. Let's give the team another big round of applause. Fantastic. So that collar process is essentially putting a glass donut on the end of that pipe. So the pipe is hollow, and we want that hole to be open so that we can add air into it, but we need that little donut to stick that cup on. So now you can see it already looks so much closer to a final vessel. It's already turned into a fabulous bubble. So we'll work a little bit to get that squished back in, and then he can blow that into its final shape. But by leaving all of that texture on the surface, the different types of glasses, this will have a really lovely tactile quality to it as well. I like how flipping that around, it automatically puts a nice white on the bottom too, right? It gave it a really lovely foundation. And so it also has, if it works the same on this one, it leaves all that blue glass that was on the bottom now on the top, so it's sort of self-rimming with its own lip wrap. Now those little connections, we added a little extra glass to the bottom of that cup just for security purposes. That extra weight or thickness makes sure that we didn't break through the bottom of it. So smoothing that out a little bit and then thickening that up even further with some clear glass on top. By the time that all melts in, you won't really notice that too much. Oh, you're opening it back up? I guess he's doing something different than what I thought he was doing.
No, I want to put another blue line.
You're tweezing that open to put more blue on there?
Yeah, one more blue.
So reverse everything I just said about a beautiful white
yeah.
bottom?
That's
Awesome.
right. So sorry.
No, you're good, you're good. I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. I haven't seen this process before, so we're catching up together. It's great.
Me neither.
That'll add a really nice pop of color on the bottom too. So hot glass. Just using the hot glass to essentially melt a small space on the bottom of that bubble. And you can see how he's digging those tweezers in. Now it's not just poking the tweezers, it's actually using the tweezers to push a negative space. So as he puts the tweezers in, he lets the pressure off of them, they widen, and it stretches the glass just a little bit. If you keep kind of digging as you poke through, eventually the glass will be so thin it'll just boop, pop, and he can get those tweezers all the way through. Now, if he were to use the furnace and just try to heat the bottom of the piece to be able to poke through there, the shoulders, the more of the vessel itself would have gotten hot, and it started to move around and be a little harder to control. So this is just kind of a quicker way of poking a hole in the bottom. Other possibilities could have been to use the hot torch to do the same thing. Again, spot heating very specific, tiny little areas, and then poking through with that. So it kind of looks like he's building a very similar structure to what all of those puzzle pieces would have been. And then fitting, we're going to fit in a little bit of glass there.
I am. Who is Katie? It's been a long day.
Now, I'm noticing as Jeff works, he's used quite a few different kinds of shears today. Now, shears is just another way of saying scissors or anything. That's what we use is shears, not scissors. But we've got these 3 different varieties that we have on the tool bench typically. Now, straight shears, those are like scissors. Those are pretty familiar. Most everyone would understand that straight shears are going to end up using them to cut and trim. So that's what he used to cut all these pattern pieces. As you cut with straight shears, they sort of flatten the glass just a little bit. So if it's a blob like that, and he were to cut with our straight shears, it would end up creating a square point, or a point if you go at a different angle. So instead of using a straight shears, Jeff has been mostly using what we call diamond shears for the purpose of laying all those blue lines. So this tool is pretty unusual.
Question?
I don't think I've never seen it in any other capacity than in glassmaking. But you can see the diamond pattern in the center. That's really where it gets its diamond shear name. It's not made with diamonds or anything. But that diamond shape allows the blades to come together and keep the glass round as you cut it. So every time he cuts free with that round shears, it'll keep the bit in a nice round shape. And now you can see how he's using the straight shears to sort of cut up the excess. And as he cut, you see how it left a little bit of a point there? So the type of shears you choose to make a cut can make a drastic difference in the final effect. Because they're also made of metal. And anytime you touch glass with metal, they're going to chill just a little bit, that glass. So if you were to try to use a diamond pair to make a really big round blob and then wanted to grab the tip and pull the tip sharper, it's not going to work. There's a little cold cap to it, so you'd have to reheat and readjust that theory.
Take that other door.
But glassmaking tools, Glassmaking tools are pretty artistic in their own right. There's only a few companies worldwide that specialize in making glass blowers tools. And so there are slight variations to some of those designs depending on the maker. But a lot of the basic tools are the same as what they were using in ancient times. Been blowing glass for about 2,000 years. And while we've made great advances on some of the technology and the way that we melt glass and using things like torches and different approaches, a lot of the concepts and a lot of the basics are the same. If we brought an ancient Roman glass blower here to the museum, of course they'd be a little overwhelmed by the amazing place that they're at, but they would be able to sit down at our bench and be able to make glass and make beautiful objects. So I mentioned earlier, Jeff did not need a glove because that pipe was not getting hot enough to be uncomfortable to hold. But if it does tend to creep the heat up a little bit, if it gets a little too hot to hold, we've got a pipe cooler. So just spreading a little water on that iron helps cool it and make it a little bit more comfortable. It's one of the signs of a professional glassworker that you see that they're carrying the pipe close to their body and the weight of the glass close to them. It's beginners that are afraid of the glass, and it's like fish pulling and keep the glass as far away from me as possible. But that makes the glass seem that much heavier and that much harder to handle. So you can see Jeff has got choked up really tight on that pipe, has really great dexterity. This marvering process might look like a passive action that he's just letting it kind of slob onto the marver table, but he's actually lifting up as he's working as well, kind of adjusting pressure. If he sees a high spot, he might add a little pressure with his thumb to let it squish, but if he were to let the entire weight of that piece just rest on the marver, it would just flatten and puddle to the marver. So my first glass blowing instructor said I could marver on the wall just as easily as I can marver on a flat surface. It's that much of a controlled activity.
Can I get the kind of medium-sized pour for this? Yeah, just put them on the edge of that.
You don't think you can marver on the wall? Need a little more gravity? I mean, it's not an ideal technique, but the theory. Yeah. Is there a wall he could try? Well, unfortunately, most of our walls are covered in paint. Katie, pick up this marver. Go upright. See if we can marver on it. So now that we've got it pretty well pushed together, start working on the expansion. So Catherine has jumped in. She's inflating the glass for Jeff. This partnership is fairly common in glass making, having another assistant down inflating the glass as you are watching and containing or manipulating that glass. With all those different pieces, with all the light and dark, the soft and stiff, there's a lot of potential for a blowout or irregular things to start happening. So if Jeff were to blow the glass for himself, there's sort of blind spots that happen as you're blowing down into that pipe. So this gives him the best control, being able to really visualize as the glass is moving and having that assistance. Also turning the pipe, holding it up in the air, that's allowing gravity to elongate it at the same time as they are turning. It's another sign of a professional glassworker. You see them kind of multitasking and trying to accomplish as much as they can in each heat. So good teamwork there. We got any other questions for him up there? Yeah, I'll come and chat with you.
That's good.
All right, we got a good question here now. Oh, we totally missed it. You guys are working too fast. I didn't even notice. They must have squished that with a pair of corks to get a beautiful flattened effect. And I really love when vessels are flattened, especially if they're highly patterned like this, because it changes the perspective, creates a focus, and really gets you to kind of create a canvas that you're really looking at on the surface of that vessel, and letting the light transfer in a slightly different way. Beautiful. But we've been seeing some really great views inside of our furnace. And we had a gentleman here in the audience who was curious how we're seeing inside of that furnace. Well, it is a 2,100 degree furnace, so we can't put standard cameras inside. Eventually, maybe the GoPro Inferno will be put into market. But for now, we have a camera located behind that unit. And it's peering through a really small piece of glass. And so if you later on kind of look in there, you might even see the little black square in the very back of that furnace. But that special window has to be made of a particular kind of glass. We talked a little bit about the chemistry of glasses, and if you change the chemistries, you change their working properties. So standard windows are made of soda lime glass, just like we are melting. So if we made a standard window and put it behind that furnace, it would just melt out of the back of that furnace. So we had to find a glass that was temperature resistant and, of course, optically clear to be able to see through it, and the standard camera located and protected behind it. So it is a product called fused silica. And with that, it has a temperature resistance of nearly 4,000 degrees with its chemistries, and also is very optically clear. So that's how we're seeing inside, is that it's a little teeny high temperature resistant window in the very back. But it's a pretty unique view that I think Corning's one of the only places that has that view, and it can really add some fun moments to the show, like trying to hypnotize everybody, spinning really quickly with a highly patterned vessel, or having characters in there and they look like they're kind of dancing as we're reheating and stuff. And some of us have even gone to the point where it's kind of nice to see what's going on in the bottom of your piece. If you're flashing and maybe you can't see, if you got a complicated sculpture, we can look at those screens as well and kind of help us identify what's going on in the back. But for the most part, we've seen Jeff do a lot of really slow and determined movements until now. And you saw a little bit of flipping back and forth, a little bit of fast movement. That is capturing that fluidity of the glass. By moving quickly or in different directions, it kind of lets the glass flow as he moves. And so as it might have seemed a little bit haphazard, but he was watching and he understood, oh, I want this part to move a little bit down, a little left. And so all the angles that he holds that piece, holds that pipe, highly influences the final shape.
Watch her sing nicely.
All right, so I think we're coming up on the transfer. So it's very typical that most objects are transferred at least once when you make them on the pipe. So this transfer process gives you access to the top of your bubble to be able to finish out the top of your vessel or object. If you're doing sculpture or more complicated forms like you've seen here today, you might transfer a piece 2 or 3 times, depending on what the process entails. But this is being the final punty or final transfer. We want this one to be fairly delicate. So Catherine has rolled this on the marber table, cooled the glass. We've got it just hot enough to stick, but not truly bond. And then just a small amount of water on the top should cause thermal shock along a constriction line, telling the glass where to break. Beautiful job, nice transfer. We always love to celebrate that moment because that's a dangerous moment. There's a lot of things that can go drastically wrong in that trade-over, and trust us, we have all done things drastically wrong in that trade-over, learning the process. And sometimes you just have an odd day and you can end up losing a piece there regardless of how many years of experience that you have. So it's all about temperatures. If it's too hot, it's still malleable, so we can't get it to break. So if we were to attach that punty to too hot of a piece, we'd have to wait for the piece to cool down to be able to separate it. That means the punty was getting colder and colder, and being a delicate connection, it would most likely separate when we go to try to break that piece. So same kind of deal, if the piece itself is too cold, the punty is too hot, and we stick that on there. 1, it's gonna bond too strongly, and 2, it's just not gonna wanna let go later on. So when you go to break it, if it's too hot, you might not be able to control it as well. It'd be flopping around on that tiny little connection, only about the size of a nickel. So timing and temperature, very critical in this process. I think he's just cleaning up, making some unusual edges here. Beautiful. And also gravitating towards those straight shears. But those straight shears that he used are a little bit unique. They're called duck bills. So they got these like little duck lips on the very end of them. The main difference with this is that they never actually close all the way. You can see the tips never actually touch. So when you use these are really popular for trimming the surface or the edge or opening of a piece, because as you cut, you're not letting the little nips that can happen with a regular pair of shears. Not to say you can't do a lip cut with a regular pair as well, but these become pretty popular around here because they just have a less likelihood of those chip marks. All right, a little capturing of fluidity here, letting the natural tendencies in the material, building up just the right heat to get it to move just like he wants it. And now we've got a nice narrow top. Beautiful. What do you think, folks? Isn't that gorgeous? So inspired by the Merletto Irregolare, a regular lace pattern. And the perseverance as part of our past and present show just opened here at the museum not too long ago. So you definitely want to plan a trip here this summer. We've got lots of fun activities going on around the museum. I love summer here. There's so much activity and smiling faces. So definitely plan a visit to check out that show. Again, we will have this up on our YouTube channel. So for those of you who might have missed the very beginning of the process and want to know a little bit more about how he made that cup and that pattern, that will be eventually, usually it takes about a week or two to get up onto our online YouTube channel. But the final stage of this and every piece that we make is the slow cooling process. We talked a little bit about how those little individual pieces could have cracked or popped if we got them too cold. Well, if this piece cools down too quickly, the whole thing will end up exploding and cracking pretty quickly. So Katie's going to catch it. It's going to go right into our annealing oven where it'll cool slowly over night and hopefully survive that cooling process so we can get a better look at it tomorrow. And we'll also post a picture with it on our social media of that final beautiful piece. All right, let's give it up. It's safe in the oven. Jeff Mack, everybody. Catherine, Katie, and Anna, so good to see you all working so hard today. Really appreciate everyone joining us here in-house. And Linnea, thank you so much for your insights on that past and present show. But we hope you enjoyed your time at the Corning Museum of Glass. You want to say anything to wrap it up? All right. All right, so Jeff says thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
That's great. That looked way better than